Chapter 19 is the first of 3 chapters that cover the cardiovascular system. So in Chapter 19, we do blood and all the components that we find in the bloodstream. Chapter 20, we're going to work on the heart and how it pumps blood. And then Chapter 21, we learn about blood vessels and circulation. This chapter is going to challenge you as far as getting to the details. The major concepts are pretty straightforward in that blood is a connective tissue that transports things within the bloodstream. But what do those things do in the bloodstream? Are they functioning in the bloodstream, or are they just in the blood in order to get to where they need to go? So let's take a look at the chapter topics. The first one is your basic functions of blood. Then we're going to talk about the basic composition of blood. So blood is a mixture of all kinds of things. So we're going to start to kind of separate it out. And the first thing we do is separate it out into what we call the formed elements, which are your cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, but also platelets, which technically aren't cells. They're more like little fragments of cells. So that's the formed elements, and then the liquid portion is plasma. And plasma is going to contain a number of different molecules. So we're going to look at the plasma, break that down. Most of that plasma is going to be water, but you're also going to find some proteins, some nutrients, electrolytes, and some other goodies in the plasma. We're going to get into the formation of blood cells. So all these blood cells are produced in the bone marrow, and we're going to take a little bit of a view into how those cells are produced. Then we're going to get into the formed elements. Again, a formed element are going to be red blood cells, so we're going to get into the erythrocytes, white blood cells, or leukocytes, and then under the heading of leukocytes, we're going to get into the 5 different types of white blood cells. So neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes. Then we get into platelets, and you've probably heard the fact that platelets are involved in blood clotting, so we'll talk a little bit about blood clotting. And then finally we get into blood typing as our last topic in this chapter. So let's start at with some basic functions. So again, I think we all are aware that the major function of our blood is to transport. It's going to transport whatever really needs to get from point A to point B can go into the bloodstream. It's a connective tissue, so it's a liquid connective tissue. If you remember from A&P1, you learned about the different types of tissues. Well, blood is a connective tissue. Then again, chapter 20, we'll learn about the heart. Chapter 21 will go into blood vessels. But when we take a look at blood, you'll notice the first thing we can do is separate it out into the plasma, which is basically that extracellular matrix. So everything that lies outside of the cells. And then the cells and cell fragments we call formed elements. Basic functions of blood. So blood transports. So we have to transport gases. So oxygen enters at the lungs and then has to be transported to all the cells of the body. Carbon dioxide has to go the other way. It's produced by cells of the body and has to be transported to the lungs. Nutrients enter the bloodstream at your intestines, and then they need to be circulated throughout the body. All those hormones we learned about in the last chapter have to circulate in blood. We transport heat, so we can remove heat from the body by sending more blood to the skin and then remove that heat from the bloodstream. And then waste products. Waste products are produced by cells and need to be transported. Many of those waste products are eventually excreted at the kidneys in the form of urine. Number 2, regulation of homeostasis. So whatever your cells need to be as far as pH, temperature, water content, the blood really plays a vital role in maintaining those conditions. And that's why blood is such a good diagnostic tool, because if there's a problem with something in the bloodstream, if something is too high or too low in your bloodstream, there's a good chance that that molecule is high or low within your cells and might affect cellular function. And then the last one is protection. A couple ideas here is one is blood clotting as a protective mechanism. So it protects the body from blood loss and therefore fluid loss. If you lose blood, you're losing a lot of the fluid in the body. And then it also transports your immune cells. And immune cells, those white blood cells we're going to learn about, are all part of your immune system. And they're getting to where they need to go by entering the blood. So you'll notice here is we're going to kind of start at this level of separation. So when we take what we call whole blood and look at it on the microscope, you're going to see that there's some different types of cells in there, and then you're going to have the plasma portion. Well, if we put blood in a test tube and then spin it really fast in what's known as a centrifuge, we can separate out the components based on density. So the things that are very dense will settle to the bottom. So the red blood cells are very dense because they're filled with hemoglobin, which makes them dense. The white blood cells and platelets kind of settle on top of the red blood cells. They're not as dense. They're not full of as much protein as a red blood cell has. Platelets are also about the same density as the white blood cells. And we call that the buffy coat. And then the liquid part, the plasma, stays on top. And notice roughly 55% of your blood is liquid plasma, and therefore the rest of it, about 45%, are the red blood cells and the white blood cells and platelets. The reason why it says 45% here is that the white blood cells and platelets are like less than 1% of your blood. Okay, let's start to take it and look a little closer at blood. So here's that centrifuge, by the way. So you can draw blood, spin it really fast. There's that same image showing the plasma on top, the buffy coat containing the white blood cells and platelets, and that's being less than 1% of the volume. And then the remaining, roughly 45%, are the red blood cells or erythrocytes. A little bit about the characteristics of blood. Color. Color depends on how much oxygen. We call that oxygen saturation. The more oxygen the blood has, kind of the brighter red it becomes. The less oxygen, it becomes more of a dark red. A lot of times we think blood is blue and red. Blood is never blue. Some of the veins appear blue beneath the skin, but that's more the color of the blood vessel and not the color of the actual blood. So blood will change a little bit. The blood you see, for example, if you have a cut and you're bleeding, is going to be bright red because it sucks up a lot of oxygen when it exits the bloodstream. So color varies a little bit based on oxygen. pH, the normal pH of blood should be 7.35 to 7.45. That's a very important characteristic of blood, is its pH. If it gets below 7.35, we call that acidosis because it's going more towards the acidic side of pH, which is a lower number. If it goes above 7.45, we call that alkalosis because the higher the pH, the more alkaline or basic the blood is. The temperature. Notice the temperature is higher than what we would say normal body temperature is. Normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit and 37 degrees Celsius. So blood is warm. One reason is blood is constantly helping to remove heat from your body. I like to think of it as kind of like if you put your hand over your air conditioner outside your house, the air that's getting kind of circulated out of that air conditioner is going to be warm because the air conditioner is removing the heat from your house. So blood is warm. Wherever you have a lot of blood flow, that tissue might be warm. So when we get into things like inflammation, one sign of inflammation is the tissue is warm, and that's because the higher blood flow to that tissue. It makes up 8% of your body weight. So that's a huge component of the body is blood. As far as volume, the average volume in a male is about 5 to 6 liters. And in a female, it's about 4 to 5 liters. So a good number to remember is 5. A little bit less than 5 in females, a little bit more than 5 in males. Okay, now notice what we're going to do. We're going to take that basic separation, formed elements, plasma, and start to separate it out even more. Okay, so you'll notice if we were to take this plasma, we see that about 91.5% of it is water, about 7% of it is protein. So you have quite a bit of protein in that plasma portion. And then 1.5% is all the other stuff. All right, we can take the protein portion, that 7%, and look at the big three. Most of the protein in your blood is known as albumins, and we'll talk a little bit about the function of albumins in a little bit. 38% are known as the globulin proteins, and then 4% is called fibrinogen. And we're going to talk about fibrinogen when we get to blood clotting. It's a very important protein involved in clotting of blood. If we look at some of the other solutes, ions, so we're looking at sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, a lot of different ions or electrolytes are in plasma. Nutrients, what comes to mind should be, glucose, amino acids are important nutrients. You're going to find a lot of the waste in the plasma, a little bit of gases. This is a little confusing because most of your gases, like oxygen, is going to be in your red blood cells. But there's going to be a little bit of oxygen in the plasma, and there's going to be a little bit of carbon dioxide in the plasma. And then regulatory substances would be things like hormones. All those hormones from the previous chapter are found in the plasma portion of your blood. When we take the formed elements, we separate those out into platelets. And notice there's about 250 to 400,000 platelets per cubic millimeter. Basically, a cubic millimeter is also a microliter. So that's how many platelets are in just a tiny, tiny little microliter. White blood cells, 5 to 10,000 white blood cells per cubic millimeter or microliter. And then you've got red blood cells, about 5 million, 4.2 to 6.2 red blood cells per microliter. If we take the white blood cells, we got to further separate those out because there's different types. And again, those are called neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. And then these are their normal percentages. So of all the white blood cells in your blood, most of them, 60 to 70% of them, are the neutrophils. So this kind of gives you a layout of where we're going. We're taking what we call whole blood, right? 8% of your body weight, whole blood, and we're trying to separate it out into its individual components and then learning what those components do. All right? And what we typically start with are the red blood cells. Okay, so let's look at this right here. So notice that it mentions here formed elements 45%. Remember that the white blood cells and platelets are less than 1%. So really most of this 45% are red blood cells. And we can measure that, okay? So in a normal individual, okay, if you are a male, this percentage here of red blood cells should be somewhere around 47%, plus or minus 5. So it could dip down to 42%. It might be as high as 52%. So that's the normal percent of the blood occupied by red blood cells. And that is known as a hematocrit. Okay, a hematocrit is one of our many blood tests we can do. We can see what percent of that person's blood is red blood cells. In females, it's a bit lower. So the normal number is about a 42% plus or minus 5. So women might have maybe as low as 37% or as high as 47%. All right. Now, why would we do this measurement? Well, at some point we're going to talk about anemia. Anemia is a very common kind of blood issue where the blood cannot transport enough oxygen. And that can lead to fatigue, right? Weakness, dizziness. And one cause of that is a low hematocrit, a low percentage of red blood cells. Okay, so when you learn about blood, sometimes you got to learn about some of these really important blood tests that are done. And that's one of them. It's known as a hematocrit. Now, why? Why do men have a higher percent? That higher percent of red blood cells is typically due to testosterone. Testosterone is going to help stimulate the production of more red blood cells. And women might often be menstruating. So during menstruation, they might actually lose some of the red blood cells. All right? Okay. Let's kind of start all over from the top. And we're going to, first look at blood plasma, and then eventually we'll move into the red blood cells, and then the white blood cells, and then the platelets. So this is a table. There's a lot of information in here. Again, I always tell my students, focus on red. Red is typically going to be your most important, terms on a slide. So we're looking at the substances in plasma, water being 91%, 91.5% of it. All right, and that's basically your solvent. When you learn about solutions, which blood is a solution, the most abundant molecule is called your solvent, and it's kind of the main, component of what your blood is. It's water. Then you got the proteins, right? 7% of plasma is protein. Collectively, all these proteins are responsible for what's known as osmotic pressure. We're a little too early in the game to be kind of talking about that. We're going to talk about that later in the semester. So we can kind of hold off on that for now. But what I want you to focus in on is the three most abundant proteins. 60% of the protein is albumins. These albumins, being the most abundant, are really important for that osmotic pressure. All right. What I also want you to remember about these albumins is they are not very huge proteins. They're kind of small, which makes them very useful because we don't want to lose protein. All right. So when your kidneys are filtering blood, you don't want the kidney to filter out protein. And if there's any problem with those kidneys, albumin is kind of the first protein that might get filtered out of your blood. So then we can look for it in urine. And if we find albumin in urine, that's usually a big red flag. It might mean there's an issue with kidneys. Other than that, some of these albumins are used to help transport things within the bloodstream. But you'll definitely be asked, what's the most abundant plasma protein? And that would be your albumins. Globulins, there's a whole bunch of different types of globulins. One form of the globulins are the immunoglobulins. So these are part of your immune system. And you've probably heard about antibodies at some point, especially during COVID. I think, the word antibody was thrown out quite a bit during COVID because you want antibodies. Antibodies are protecting you against viruses and bacteria. So when your immune system produces these antibodies or immunoglobulins, they circulate throughout your body, within the blood plasma. Okay, and then finally fibrinogen. We're gonna learn about that protein. It's very important, essential in blood clotting. Okay. All right. Next table goes through some other solutes. We're not going to go crazy here at all. Electrolytes. Those are, like I mentioned, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. They're all in the liquid part. Nutrients, I mentioned, amino acids, glucose, vitamins, minerals are in the plasma. And then you got a little bit of these gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. Regulatory substances, again, also not going to go crazy here. Hormones would be regulatory substances. You might have some enzymes in the bloodstream, but they're going to make up a pretty small component of the blood plasma. Formed elements. So here we go. We're going to kind of start with red blood cells, but we'll start a new video for the red blood cells. But this is kind of a overview. It's got a lot of information that we can refer back to this. So we're going to be going over each one of these formed elements individually. But when we're all done, you can go back and use this potentially as a kind of a summary of all the things we're going to talk about. So what do? We take a look at, kind of what the cell looks like. So kind of the structure or the anatomy of the cell. We'll learn a little bit about shape. Some of these cells have a particular shape to them, or the nucleus has a particular shape to them. We'll look a little bit at the size comparisons. You'll notice platelets are very, very small little fragments, whereas like a monocyte is a pretty big cell. We'll notice that there's color. Now the color differences is based on a staining procedure, especially these white blood cells. Red blood cells are red. They're red because of hemoglobin. But white blood cells are clear. They're transparent. So you wouldn't be able to see them under the microscope, and you definitely wouldn't be able to differentiate them. You wouldn't be able to tell which is which. So there's a staining procedure so we can better identify the different types of white blood cells. So we're going to look a little bit at color, whether it's color of the nucleus or color of these little vesicles that might be inside the cell. We definitely want to know function. All right, it's very important to know the function of each of these. And then the abundance. All right, so there's going to be some numbers you might have to remember, whether those numbers are, say, in the millions for the red blood cells, or in the thousands for the white blood cells, or is it a percentage of those white blood cells? All right, so we'll come back to this figure, or you can come back to this figure once we've gone through them in detail. So the next video we'll kind of start with formation of the blood cells, and then we'll move into first the red blood cells, then each of the white blood cells, and then the platelets.